to order. I'm going to read a statement. First of all, welcome to the August 27th, 2020 electronic meeting of the Environmental Commission. This meeting is in accordance with executive orders from the governor to effect social distancing and mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus. We intend to conduct this meeting similarly to an in-person meeting. However, please be patient. If there are technical issues, public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call 1-888-788-0099. Again, that's 1-888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID number 924-5796-9823. That's meeting ID number 924-5796-9823. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city website and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16, AT&T channel 99, and online at www.a2gov.org/watchctn. Okay, so would you like to do the roll call?
Yes, sir. Okay, just 1 second. Attendance. Okay, Commissioner Graham. Commissioner Skinner. Commissioner Needham.
Here.
Commissioner Smith. Well, Councilmember Smith.
Present.
Commissioner Slavic. Commissioner Appel. Commissioner Gibb Randall.
Here.
Councilmember Bannister.
Here.
Commissioner Callywart.
Here.
Chairman Brown. Or
Present.
Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Overpeck.
He's muted.
Oh, he's here. Okay. Commissioner Mursky.
Here.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Here.
Commissioner Singleton. I'm sorry. Commissioner Bunadia.
Here.
Oh, great. Okay, that's roll call.
All right, so we have a quorum.
Yes, we do.
All right, thank you, Galen. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. I have two things that I'd like to suggest. I move that we, first of all, the approval of the minutes is entered twice in the agenda. I propose that we accept the approval of the minutes after the public commentary. This is within our bylaws. This is what the agenda order is stipulated. So I move to strike the first instance of the approval of the minutes from the agenda, and I would also like to add one item that we were going to approve. We were going to elect a vice chair at this meeting. And so I would like to insert that after the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. That would be the first public commentary, approval of the minutes, and then add the vice chair election. Is there a motion, a second?
I'll second it.
Okay.
I'd like to also add agenda items for the next meeting. That was also not on the agenda.
Mhm.
So if we could consider all three of those.
Yes, John, please go ahead.
So I second all three.
Okay. So what was your agenda item?
It was just on the agenda. There was nothing on there for agenda items for the next meeting.
Oh, that's on the printed agenda now.
Oh, it is. Okay. It was not on the original one sent out. Okay, great.
Yeah, it's right there.
Okay, great.
All right. So so it's been seconded. All who approve of the amended agenda, say aye. Raise your hands.
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody says no? Okay, it was approved unanimously. So the next item on the agenda is the special presentation. So first up here is Missy Stultz, who's going to present on goals and metrics and the sustainability dashboard matrix that was established, how that's evolved. So you have the floor, Missy.
Amazing. Well, it's good to see you all. I'm going to share my screen here. I hope you're all enjoying a cool night. It's pretty steamy and gorgeous. So Commissioner Brown asked me to talk about the sustainability framework, and to give context, I was an Arborite when we did the sustainability framework. So I don't have the legacy of being a staffer that was working day in and day out on it. I have more the courtesy of being one of the people on the outside that was pushing for it. So bear with me if you have a lot of questions about history. Some of you have more detail about the nitty-gritty kind of process than I have. That said, the sustainability framework is a framework that the city undertook, and it was part of a movement that was happening around the nation at the time, led largely by the STAR Communities program, where we were trying to think holistically about sustainability. So there were 16 overarching sustainability topics that came out of the framework. They were grouped into 4 thematic areas, and they're shown on the bottom of the screen. And those were climate and energy, community, land use and access, and resource management. And sustainability was intended to be sustainability in its purest sense, the big, broad umbrella of sustainability. So this was done and created by getting lots of input, reading lots of city plans. I believe 30 or so city plans were analyzed to understand their priorities and objectives, and there was some input into the process. And eventually this was adopted, and it actually became a policy guide for the master plan. So the framework itself, this is what it looks like, right? So you've got those plans that provided input, and then it fell out into these various categories that you can see here. And I realize this is hard to see. I'm assuming most of you are fairly familiar with the sustainability framework, and I'm going to highlight a few things in there. The sustainability framework also provided input into the climate action plan, but not everything. And that probably makes sense because the climate and energy goals were the ones that were the most important and pertinent to the 2012 climate action plan that the city produced. And so here, the subcategories, so that overarching was about climate and energy, and then the subcategories or thematic areas were around energy, both sustainable production of it and conservation, and then sustainable buildings. So this kind of lived in the plan itself and was slowly moving forward. The sustainability framework also helped inform things like the city's capital improvements plan, and was often cited in resolutions that were brought forward by staff. But I'm going to kind of say it sort of stopped there. So I heard all of these great things about how the sustainability framework had been integrated into the CIP, and then I joined the city and saw what that looked like. And it was really valuable at a high level, but lacked a lot of the detailed substance. So here's what the sustainability framework also had with it. It had these goal areas we talked about, those 16 goal areas, the 4 broad thematic areas, and then it had these indicators that we were supposedly tracking to demonstrate progress. Well, here are a few things. So this was always meant to be an overarching guide for the city in terms of the policies and programs that we move forward. A dashboard was created, but I think you all know it was rarely maintained and rarely feels fairly generous. Most of these things were not tracked, and I will argue, I don't think these are even the right indicators in most situations. So we had this really great process that came up with really good thematic areas, really good goals, and sometimes good indicators and sometimes not. It led to a framework that really honestly has been disproportionately used. Some units use it. Some units use it to kind of elevate their work to say, look, we're in alignment with the framework. Some, I'll be honest, I have no idea when they talk about their alignment with the framework, like I can't see it, but it's used kind of in discourse disproportionately, and it's not institutionalized, candidly, in the city. So I have talked about this with many of you. It was something that I was concerned with too when I came to the city. And then of course we made commitments around carbon neutrality, and that sort of took all of our attention. I'm not going to pretend that it didn't take all of our attention in that rapid time frame we had to move forward with carbon neutrality. So I've been thinking and talking to the city administrator about what a revised approach could look like and where we are today. So bear with me here. This is also impossible to see, but what it is the city is doing priority-based budgeting right now. It's our first pilot into that process, and we created this matrix. Now, this matrix might look pretty familiar to you if you are able to read anything on the screen, because we developed it based on 4 inputs. We had done a resident survey to understand resident priorities. The sustainability framework was one of the major inputs into this. We had an organizational strategic plan. And then we had our consultants who do priority-based budgeting also give us some input. When you look across this framework, what's powerful about it is everything in the sustainability framework is here. So I worked with Tom Crawford when he was the CFO of the city, and we led the process to integrate these things. What I like about this approach now is we're actually making budget decisions based on this. So eventually, again, we're in a pilot right now. Staff, actually, Galen and I were some of the staff that went through and actually ranked, it's pretty amazingly tedious, everyone's budget in one of these areas. So we delegated staff to a certain area, there were criteria, and then we had to go through and say, how does this align with our goals around environmental stewardship? And the individual units ranked themselves, we ranked, and we compared and contrasted. And that's where we are in the process. We are all learning how that's gonna more fully inform the city budget. But again, I like that it's going to lead to some informing of the city budget, which feels far more institutional than the framework that never really had that tie. This also is informing a new city strategic plan that we hope to launch when we determine who our new city administrator is. That feels like the right time to really have this kind of collective community conversation about where we're headed. We are working on dashboards. We are a long way off. And I think we need to own that, and we need to name this. This is not going to be done this year. This probably won't even be done next year, because we're talking about every unit of the city and automating as much of this data as possible. So we have work to do. But when it is informing our budget and informing our strategic plan, then it's institutionalized and connected. So it's a lot easier to be evaluating performance based on these metrics. And so it becomes another thing that is kind of par for the course of how we operate as a government. And it's integrated into work plans because we have to track on it, right? When it's part of the budget, you have to track on your budget performance and the outcomes from your budget. And so again, this just kind of rounds out the conversation. So let me just end by talking a little bit about 820, especially from the office's side. When you look at this, this is the sustainability framework. We've got 820. I don't know if you noticed, I think 4 things went away. 820 touches on almost every single thing in the sustainability framework, not all of them directly, but almost all of them indirectly. These are the areas where 820 is very clearly grounded and in alignment with the sustainability framework. So even though we might be kind of evolving the framework itself, it still lives. And it lives because this is the plan that guides everything that our office is going to continue to do, and what the city is doing, because 820 is also in that priority-based budgeting matrix. So our guiding metric is going to continue to be greenhouse gas emissions. That has to be our guiding metric with the audacious and beautiful goal that we have around carbon neutrality. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to have other metrics. So right now, this is drafty, I'll be honest. We're working with lots of departments to figure out the various metrics that we're going to track. And we are working with IT to automate these metrics, looking at things, of course, you're going to get a greenhouse gas inventory update at one of your future meetings. It's hot off the press. I know the numbers, but I'm not going to share them just yet. It looks great, but we have a lot of work to do. So we're going to continue to use that. But we also want to be able to identify, how are we doing with local renewable generation? What are our land use and transportation metrics look like in terms of ridership, walkability, modal shifts? What does it look like in terms of the average commute in and out of the city? What are our material use and diversion rates? Are we really making progress towards a circular economy? And how do we know? What really are the deep, meaningful impacts and metrics that demonstrate the progress we want to have? Of course, there'll be things like counts that we do. We talked about this today. Counts do not make me feel warm and fuzzy, but they are a metric. So how many neighborhood ambassadors do we train? How many emergency kits do we give out? Of course, how many resilience hubs? But once we get these hubs up and operational, we can start talking about more meaningful metrics. How many people are using them and how? What's their experience like in that facility? So that is a whirlwind takeaway to say, as we're, well, honestly, in this moment, we are evolving the sustainability framework. We do not have the time or the staff capacity to track all of those metrics. And I honestly can't. I can't do that and make the deep, meaningful progress we need to make on A20. And I also don't think they're the right metrics out the gate to be tracking. So we'd have to go back and do an entire new process to figure out what they should be. That was fun. Questions? John, thank you for using your hand icon.
Sure. Thanks for putting this together, Missy. I think this is something many of us have been asking about for a couple of years now, so appreciate the time to dig into it and your honest assessment of where things are at and where you hope things might go. With kind of the new plan that you laid out, I see how that aligns quite strongly with the goals and objectives we've set out for Ann Arbor. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how we might be able to use that to benchmark against other communities. That was one of the advantages of the previous plan and the link to the STARS communities. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that with kind of a new approach going forward. Thanks.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And at this point, it depends on metric by metric. So we certainly benchmark in terms of per capita greenhouse gas emissions, performance on renewable energy generation, or waste diversion. So we're able to do it metric by metric, but we don't have that overarching framework. And honestly, I'm not sure that we would. Based on where we are right now, we're looking, if we go to the priority-based budgeting framework, we wouldn't do lead for cities yet. That's not saying we won't. It's just saying in this moment where we are sprinting at beautifully audacious goals, I don't feel the pressure or the necessity of pausing that work to do this benchmarking in this other space.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Well, I have one, Missy. I would just like to have a I don't expect an answer today, but I would expect to have a discussion soon within the next 3 months about what you see the role of the commissions to be in helping generate these metrics and helping to track them as well. I know part of the original intent of the sustainability dashboard was not just to track progress that the city has, to see if it's improving based on its budget expenditures, but also how we are comparing to other communities as well. So I don't know if that's, so the only answer I wanted today was, what do you think? What's your first take on what that, is that still a goal or useful?
Yeah, it is useful. It's very useful to understand how we're performing compared to our peers. Generally speaking, though, no one is doing a fabulous job, right? Like we're all sort of figuring it out. So it's useful, but it's not the penultimate metric, right? Like all of us performing poorly doesn't make me feel good. So I think we're trying to figure out how we can benchmark and learn from peers and understand our performance and also push the entire field, right? So that we're all moving together, because that's what's necessary in most of these metrics. And Steve, to your first point, I actually will offer right now, we are just about to form an internal work group to really unpack those metrics around A20 in more depth. A20 has metrics, right? Like it says what we want to do. What we're trying, like we've extracted all of those and now we're figuring out the automation, right? Like how are we going to get this data? Because we don't want to have it be a manual enterprise every 3 or 4 months. How do we automate it? So if anyone from the commission is interested in joining us, we would welcome that support. I would say if you want to let Galen know, please join us in that journey.
Okay, that's good. All right. I think I'll volunteer for diversion.
Gotcha.
Right now. But all right, well, thanks, Missy. If there's no other questions for Missy.
Oh, it looks like Bob's got one.
Yeah, oh, sorry, Bob.
You covered a lot of ground really quickly, and I honestly got a bit lost. So when you were talking about, taking until the end of next year, maybe, at that point, do you envision that we would have a new dashboard to replace what's currently there with, metrics that we can actually live with, that we think are smart, for all the goals, and including the ones that don't directly relate to A20? Yep. Or is that what you were saying is too much to take it?
No, you're asking a really good question, and thank you for that additional clarification, Commissioner Needham. Actually, what we're doing is rolling out metrics as we can get them. So we won't have a full package of metrics. For example, the police department is working on updating their metrics right now and reporting those more transparently. We have work to do on those metrics, but there's already a dashboard that's up for those metrics around safety. And so we want to keep rolling them out. We just won't necessarily have the comprehensive suite of those metrics for a bit longer. So it's actually in the middle, right? Like we're taking full accountability for all the climate and energy metrics. You'll have those soon. The others may take a little bit more time. Yeah. Commissioner Mitchell, did you want to?
Hello. Hi, Missy. So I'm kind of into the nitty gritty of questions, and just to understand the slide on the carbon emissions, could you just explain the actual emissions versus weatherized?
Sure. So we have both when we do our inventory. We look at absolute emissions and then we weatherize those emissions. Excuse me. So we can do a comparison. For example, this is going to be a warm summer. And so we would expect that air conditioning rates are going to be slightly warmer for people, and we're home more. So we would normalize that, but it doesn't matter because we need the absolute number as well. So we run both of those different scenarios. And you should that's a really good question. Thea is going to come present to you guys at a future meeting and give you the inventory results. And you can, I'll prep her to give you both the weatherized information and the raw.
Okay, so it's more like a standardization.
Yeah, that's right. And that's just so we can compare, like, did we peak? Like, is this year anomalous in some way or not? And so that way we can say, actually, no, it was just incredibly hot. So yes, we consumed a lot of energy, but that is also because of this variable versus, oh no, like something broke somewhere in the system. Like we have a leak in the system and we need to plug that leak. Totally different solutions to those problems.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
I have to speak up, I'm sorry. This is the last time I'm going to talk about metrics. And I mean it, I'm not going to talk about it again. I'm speaking as a resident. It is impossible as a resident to go to the city website or to go anywhere and to find out how the city is performing. And I'm addressing this primarily to Chip and to Ann as, in effect, board members representing the city residents and holding the city accountable for how the city performs and whether it achieves its committed goals and whether it provides positive outcomes for the residents of Ann Arbor. And it is impossible to go to the city website and figure out how the city performs. There are individual data points. There are safety metrics for 1 year. You cannot find trends in terms of safety metrics, policing metrics, fire metrics. It's really just a joke. And I just cannot believe we as residents and the city council as a board accepts the city's reporting. We spent hours, I don't know if anybody here in this group spent hours in a metrics subcommittee making recommendations in terms of how the dashboard could be improved in terms of metrics related to environment and energy. Those have not been adopted. Those have not been measured. This is really, I've had it. I'm not going to talk about it again, but the rest of you, if you accept this from the city, it is really pathetic.
Ann?
I share your concerns, John, and I really appreciate you with being one of the key leaders calling for this in the previous years. And I tried to amplify that voice and talk about it every chance I get. And I'm frankly similarly mystified that it hasn't come forward. So I have 2 months left on council. I'm wrapping up loose ends. And John or others, could you give me a specific where to start to try to wrap wrap something up on this in my last 2 months. Because I'm not clear. Thank you, John, for mentioning the work that the committee did, or a report or something. But if I had something, point me in the direction, and I will bring a resolution or do what I'm just not sure. I'm frustrated like you.
It starts with leadership. It starts with council. It starts with the city administrator. It starts with department heads in terms of holding themselves accountable and being transparent in terms of their performance and delivering outcomes to the residents of Ann Arbor, period. It does not come from the bottom up. It does not come from anywhere else. The city needs to know, is it meeting its goals? If not, why not? How does it perform compared to benchmark cities? I put together a list of benchmark cities, provided it to the previous city administrator, where we could then benchmark a performance against the average of those performance, seeing the range. Nothing was done on that. Really, it's just appalling. I mean, there's no business in the world that could survive the way the city performs. I've had it. I'm not bringing up the subject one more time in any organization. It's the rest of you that have to drive this. If you want the city to be a great place to live, then you need to demand this. I've had it. That's it.
All right. In the interest of time, Brian Stiglitz has to leave by 7:40. So thank you. First of all, I'd just like to say that I share John's concerns, Commissioner Mursky's concerns, and I think this will be an ongoing discussion. And with a new city administrator coming on board and a new council, I think it's a good time for everybody to reflect on this and try to see what might be possible in the future going forward. So thanks, everybody. So Brian, you have the floor.
All right. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to try to share my screen. So I'm hoping that you're able to see my screen now. Can you confirm that that's the case?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a few slides and also able to answer some questions. A little bit of change in gears here to talk about the city's PFAS management strategy. I think you've probably seen a little of this before, but probably the hottest topic right now is that the state has just passed, and this slide says draft, but they're actually now enacted new maximum contaminant levels for 7 different PFAS contaminants or compounds. And this slide illustrates what those MCLs are and where the city stands in terms of its most recent measurements associated with these in drinking water. So you can see we're very well positioned because of the work that we've been doing over the past several years to address these compounds in drinking water. We're non-detect for 5 of the 7, and even the other 2, we're in one case 5 orders of magnitude lower than the MCL, and the other case about 2 orders of magnitude. So the work that the city has been doing over the past several years has positioned us well to address these new regulatory requirements and whatever may be coming down the road. The initial focus, which is pretty consistent with what's happening at the federal level, was to focus on just 2 of these. These are probably 2 of the compounds in PFOA that are probably the most common in products that we use, many people use every day. And they're the most prominent in terms of the data that exists on health impacts. And initially, these were the ones that the federal government was going to be taking a stance on potentially regulating. So we developed our own metrics around these 2 compounds. We identified a goal of less than 10 parts per trillion combined. And that remains more stringent than the new MCLs that Michigan has put in place. So again, we're striving for what we have saw by looking around the country at what's happening elsewhere in the US, Canada, and the world in terms of what are the most stringent standards that any have put in place, and we wanted to achieve that. And that has been our goal. You may have seen this chart before. The blue line is the Huron River, so that's our source water and the source of PFAS in the city's source water. It's not coming from our groundwater, but our surface water. And you can see since 2019, over the last year, pretty much regularly non-detectable levels of these compounds based on the changes that we've made in modifying how we both operate and the material we're using in our carbon filters. There's one little blip that we had earlier this year. We're talking about such low levels of these compounds that the risk of contaminating a sample just by what a person may be using in terms of soaps and conditioners and things like that can potentially contaminate a sample. So I'm not into that one little blip that happened earlier this year. I think we've been doing an outstanding job of meeting our and exceeding our performance goal. This next slide looks at total PFAS. So we're not just sampling for these 7, but we're sampling for 26 different compounds based on a state-approved method. And you'll see that, again, blue being the river and orange being the water, they sort of trend together up and down. And we're moving maybe, depending upon what the levels are, about half of the PFAS that's coming down towards us in the river. So this is probably where I would be wanting to focus and looking at in the future. We have there are a lot of these compounds. The health data is being very being slowly developed. So we're learning a lot more about more of the compounds that are in our source waters. We don't have a lot of information on what those health impacts are, but in our source water or getting into our drinking water. So I would like to see more of a focus on watershed protection and figuring out how we can get these things out of our out of the environment, because it's a lot easier to address dealing with it at the source than at the end of the pipe, which is what obviously we're doing at the drinking water treatment plant. All that being said, we're involved in several projects with several universities to look at what we can do, what technologies exist to remove these from the water. Carbon filtration has been around for a long time, and it's successful at removing some of these, but not all of them. So we're piloting some other technology. That's what the picture is an ion exchange pilot system, which has resins which exchange the PFAS anions with a different anion, and it is more effective at removing some of the shorter chain PFAS, which is some of these that are more difficult to remove with granular activated carbon, and ones that we really don't have a lot of information on in terms of what their health impacts are. So we're trying to position ourselves with understanding what technological tools we could be potentially adding to our toolbox in the future as we learn more information about health impacts associated with these compounds. But I feel like that we're well positioned. I think we're investing in the right things, and we're part of the leading edge of developing the knowledge base on how to deal with these chemicals from a drinking water perspective. So that's what I wanted to share. Are there any questions? Yes.
Gabby, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Ryan, for the presentation. I was also wondering, there's a large focus on the drinking water, but how is monitoring going in terms of using the Huron River recreationally? Are there different guidelines for what is considered safe for swimming and fishing and those types of things?
There are different guidelines, and the state has a lot of information out there on contact that's appropriate for recreation, and there's currently still a do not eat fish advisory on the Huron based on the levels that are in the fish samples that the state has collected. Huron River Watershed is also another good source of information. They have a lot of good information on PFAS. So the real risk is ingestion. So recreating in the river is not something that that we're telling people that they can't do. We do have signage posted at the liveries, for example, so people can educate themselves about the source. And really, the risk in the river is the foam, because it tends to concentrate in the foam. So when the water's like cascading over a dam, it can aerate itself, and the PFAS can concentrate. So PFAS foam looks a little bit different than river foam, but the recommendations that we're saying is wash your hands. That's really like the same with COVID. Is hand washing is really important. We actually have hand washing stations at the liveries. So wash your hands, before you get out of the water and are eating food or something. Those are the recommendations that currently exist in our best practice. So, I don't know when the fish advisory will be lifted. There's something that they're continuing to look at. I think that they're optimistic that maybe it won't be years away, but these things are persistent and they're in so many things that it's not going to that rapidly. So it's pretty much background. Even once we address some of what we know is our prime sources, you see this in everything. You see it in the soils and in this compost, and it's pretty much everywhere.
Okay. Now, John, you have a question, and then Rita.
Yeah, Brian, thanks for that update. I'm wondering if you could speak to what looked like kind of the rebound after the carbon filters were installed in the spring of 2019, and if that's just kind of what you expected or kind of what's going on there, because it dropped significantly, but then it's like went back up again on the PFAS totals slide.
Let me pull that back up. Yeah, I'm not sure that we can explain that. We've been looking and trying to talk to some of the folks who, we know are the significant contributors to the PFAS in the river. Wixom Wastewater Treatment Plant is one of those. So, at some point in this time frame, one of the dischargers, who was probably one of the primary sources to the Huron, is Arbor, put in some treatment at their facility. And we don't have a whole lot of information about how they're managing their carbon, but it's possible was in terms of its capacity to remove total PFAS. And they were pretty much focused on PFOS, which is probably that it is one of the compounds that is the most easy to remove using carbon. So what we're experiencing with our carbon is that the carbon will probably take out PFOS for several years without having to replace it. But some of these other shorter chain carbon compounds will break through the carbon in months. So in terms of a total PFAS, they probably put it in, it was probably removing a lot of different things. And then over time, these other compounds that they're not as concerned about began to break through. They're managing it for PFOS solely because that's what their regulatory and pre-treatment requirements are completely built around. The drinking water side of it is moving much faster than the wastewater side. So on in the drinking water side, now we have 7 compounds. They're still looking at 1 or 2 on the wastewater side. So we're trying to get alignment and working with the state to say, hey, we care about more than just PFOS and PFOA. You need to be looking at these other ones too. And I think that's the advocacy part of it that I think would be a good role for, maybe the Environmental Commission to weigh in on, is to help advocate for getting these compounds out of our watershed, even the ones that aren't currently regulated. That's what I'm advocating for.
Thank you.
Rita, you had a question, and then John.
Thanks, Brian. So I have 2 questions. So I'll just start with the one on the total PFAS. So it dropped in 2018, and I assume that's because of pinpointing the Arbor company. Is that correct? Or was there something else related?
No, I think that's the main reason for the drop in 2019.
Okay. And Is there communication ongoing with that company or other companies upstream of Ann Arbor about what's going into the water? How do we know what's going on that upstream side?
The state has a program where they're monitoring the source water. We're also continuing to sample. So we know, twice a month we're collecting samples from our source and our finished water. So we know what was coming into the plant and what's leaving. The state is monitoring some locations upstream in the Huron as part of their own sampling program, and they're continuing to look for sources. Wixom Wastewater Treatment Plant and Tri-Bar have their own monitoring requirements because, one is a publicly operated wastewater utility and the other one has a pre-treatment permit. So, but again, they're focused only on the ones that they're regulated for. So it's just the PFOS and PFOA, I believe, not these others. So they're not doing a total PFAS analysis like we are. So part of it is that's what we're trying to, we would be advocating is that we need to be looking at more than just these two. And we need to hold them accountable for trying to put in treatment that will address the broader scope of these chemicals.
Yeah. And part of what I'm asking is, are there other sources?
So there are some other sources, and the state has, trying to think off the top of my head. I can share some more information with you maybe after. I can send it through Galen, and you can share it. But there is other sources upstream. Tri-Bar is the most significant source, but there are other smaller contributors. Yes.
Okay. All right, thanks. My other question had to do with the educational information. And I just wondered, I've been at the Barton Dam recently and up on the Barton Pond, and I don't recall seeing signs there. Are there, where are the postings primarily, and could that be expanded just for general education?
It could be expanded. We've put signs at the liveries. There is some signs at the base of Barton Dam.
Okay, I missed it.
But yes, signs could be added. So if there were some strategic locations that you thought were important, we can work with our folks in the Parks Department to get those added.
Right. Okay, I'm thinking of near the docks.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
John and then Shannon. John Mursky.
Ryan, thank you very much for the excellent presentation. Thank you very much for the excellent performance. Thank you very much for presenting data in a trend chart where it's easily understood, performance against a standard where we could clearly see how we're doing, where we could generate the kinds of questions, intelligent ones like the one that John asked. I really appreciate it, and you've done a great service in really providing great drinking water quality to the residents of Ann Arbor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shannon?
I wanted to expand a little bit on the recreation piece and the signage. My office is near Argo, and I still see lots of people fishing. And I'm just wondering, I would assume if it's an ingestible issue that that fishing would not be a great thing. But if you could talk more about that, and I would just say that on any given day, I probably see 3 people fishing in that area. So somehow either they're choosing to ignore what's there, or it's just not quite loud enough for them to see. So if you could talk a little bit about that, that would be helpful.
You're getting outside of my area of expertise.
Okay.
But I guess the only comment I would have is, there along the Huron, angling is a big issue. So it's something that we've been talking about with the state, and catch and release is still okay. So I don't know if there's additional communication that we need to get out on that topic or not. It sounds like from your perspective, maybe we do. So I can talk to some other folks in the city and find out what we can do to maybe better communicate that. I think, again, the Huron River Watershed is another, group that's pretty active in communicating about what is safe and not safe to do on. So they might be a good partner to help. They have a lot of people use them as a resource for information.
And I think it just, in addition, having some signs around in places where people tend to do it I think would be helpful, so that they just understand that, you know, catch and release is probably the way to go. I would imagine. I don't know. I'm again making a leap, but I would imagine eating the fish if you're supposed to be not ingesting the foam, that, you know, it probably gets concentrated by them, and, you know, things like that. So I think it just needs to be a stronger message over there so people understand what the risk they're taking. What, and again, I'm not paying so close attention to understand if they're doing catch and release or if they're actually taking it home and eating it. But it does go on a lot on a regular basis. So I just put that out there. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions for Brian?
Yeah.
Oh,
You know, I just want to reiterate what Shannon just said. I also want to say thank you, Brian, for a very nice presentation and discussion. I compliment her by being down in Gallup all the time. And there they are definitely fishing, and they're not releasing some of them. And I get the feeling, of course, it's folks who probably have a problem getting enough food on the table, given the economic situation. I've seen this a lot out west. Where the lakes and rivers are often contaminated with mercury and other pollutants from coal-fired burning. So I think we should definitely put up more signage. I assume they know, and they're not going to, you know, they don't have the wherewithal to not get the fish. But nonetheless, maybe they don't know. I haven't really noticed signs, but I'm not looking hard. Thank you.
Okay, I made a note. I'll report back to you all with what additional work we can do to address the comments that you raised.
Thank you very much.
Okay, one last question from Mike Apple.
Not a question, but just those signs that do exist were put in the parks by the Watershed Council initially. So parks themselves, I don't think has done much signage for fish advisories, but the Watershed Council has been very active and are the ones who've done it on behalf of parks, or has at least let parks know that they were doing it in the past. So if there's a tree to shake, it might be the Watershed Council first.
Yeah, we regularly meet the Watershed Council, County Health, and the city. So we are all aligned and we're working together. I will communicate with all those folks. If you're not aware, we also, I heard the conversation about the metrics before I started. And from the drinking water side, we have a monthly newsletter that we put out called Quality Water Matters. You can see it at qualitywatermatters.org. And we're trying to do that, is communicate about what some of the issues are that our customers are concerned about, particularly to water quality. So you will see some metrics and some thermometers about how we're doing certain things. So if you weren't aware, it could be a resource for you. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for all the good work. And
good job, Brian. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll move on to the other. So let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which I was going to talk about the federal and state regulation and what's going on in other places. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so just for a quick review, PFAS stands for perfluorinated alkyl substances or polyfluorinated alkyl substances. What this let's see. So what are perfluoroalkyl substances? Well, basically they're molecules with multiple carbon-fluorine bonds. So this, for example, on the left are the chemical structures of PFOA, which stands for perfluorooctyl acid, because there's 8 carbons in here. And PFAS is a similar 8-carbon chain. It's perfluorooctyl sulfate. So most of these compounds have either an acidic function here, a carboxylate, or or a sulfate. So the response, the health effects of these have been known by DuPont and 3M since the 1970s, since the mid-70s. And of course, the patents have run out. It's been illegal since 2015 to manufacture either of these compounds in the United States, but it's still, but you're still allowed to import them and put them into products. So the industry response has been to just make different kinds of molecules that, stay a step ahead of the regulatory agencies. So Gen X is a compound that's a replacement for the ones on the left. It's a smaller compound, as you can see, a little bit more complicated. It has contaminated the Cape Fear River and caused a lot of problems with the city of Wilmington, North Carolina, which gets its water, from the Cape Fear River. This was from a Chemours plant in North Carolina, which was supposed to notify the state about its containment and production and containment of Gen X, but somehow one office of the EPA did not communicate that to the state office of EPA. So this was a total case of neglect for something like 6 or 8 years. And then the second compound down here, PFAS, it's something that's also been used as a replacement in firefighting foams and other commercial products. So again, these are PFAS is just an umbrella term. There are a total of some almost 5,000 synthetic chemicals that have these multiple carbon-fluorine bonds. The response to the EPA only responded back in 2004 or 2005 or so, where they set not a regulatory standard, but just a public health advisory level of 70 parts per million for the combined PFAS and PFOA. And still, at the federal level, these are the only PFAS compounds that are regulated, and they're not really regulated, they're just health advisory levels. So however, Michigan, as Brian mentioned, Michigan just enacted MCL levels or regulatory levels for 7 of these PFAS compounds just earlier this month. I think it was August 4th. As of August 4th, the state has regulatory authority for those 7 PFAS compounds. Again, the PFOA and PFOS, they've been manufactured and sold in the United States since 1943. And they can be measured in blood worldwide. These compounds have been in the environment since the 1950s, and they have been accumulating, and they are persistent. Their central property of all of these PFAS compounds is that they are persistent, both in the body and in the environment. Because it's unnatural, there are no natural carbon-fluorine chemical bonds known. And so none of us have evolved the mechanisms to either detoxify them or eliminate them specifically from our bodies. So they've principally been used in consumer products such as Scotchgard and firefighting foam by the military, especially. And a lot of contamination sites nationally are found in airports and in training facilities that were for training firemen to extinguish aircraft fires and fuel fires. Again, their main threat is that they concentrate and persist in body tissues. Unlike a lot of chemical contaminants, they do not partition into fats, but they do partition into blood and liver, where they're recirculated within the body. And another thing is that they are difficult to measure at parts per trillion. These are nanograms per kilogram, so it's the equivalent of putting a drop of one of these PFAS compounds into 20 Olympic swimming pools. So they're presenting analytical challenges. Brian alluded to, you have to be careful how you sample things because they're on many gloves. They can be found at parts per trillion or more than part per trillion level, and on gloves, clothing such as waterproof clothing. Hush puppy shoes that have been waterproofed. They're also very, very difficult to destroy. To adequately destroy any PFAS compound, you need to incinerate at above 1100 degrees centigrade, and you need to do it in a nitrogen atmosphere. There are no incineration facilities in the United States that are licensed and that are regularly monitored for these conditions. There are newer technologies. There are grant proposals out there for requests for proposals for destroying PFAS compounds, but as yet there's no really good technology to do that. The next slide here, I'm just showing a quick graphic of how states have responded to PFAS. Over here at the top, the US EPA is still not regulating PFOA and PFOS, but the sum of these compounds are supposed to be, the health advisory is that the sum of these compounds in drinking water should be less than 70 parts per trillion. California has acted, many of these other states have acted. Wherever you see an X, it means that the sum of all these compounds has to be less than 70 parts per trillion in drinking water. And these are the Michigan standards that you can see for comparison. But again, these are only a handful of the 4,700 PFAS compounds that are out there. Now, the circular economy of PFAS is that you have point sources, and they all come from industrial or these AFFF or firefighting foam point sources. And they contaminate surface and groundwaters. There are hundreds of PFAS states recognized the EGLE now in the state of Michigan. The state of Michigan has been very aggressive, more than many other states, in testing for PFAS. And they tested first for drinking water. And then their attention, once that was taken care of, they focused on wastewater treatment plant effluents and groundwater, and groundwaters that are not near sites that are known contamination sites where people are not withdrawing drinking water from those groundwaters. And then also there's a concern with biosolids that I'm going to talk about next. So in the state of Michigan here, industrial plants are allowed to discharge their wastes into wastewater, generally municipal wastewater treatment plants. EGLE has been pretty transparent about this. If you look at the MPART website, it contains a lot of information. So the states looked at all wastewater treatment plant effluents for those that have industrial pretreatment permits. Ann Arbor is one of those. Ann Arbor has an industrial pretreatment permit, I think mostly because of the university, because there are no manufacturing plants here in Michigan anymore. I mean, here in Ann Arbor. Another source of contamination is through commercial distribution, because, for example, Scotchgard, non-stick cookware, it all ends up in the landfill, and landfill leachate generally contains high levels of PFAS coming from these solid wastes, and they end up in the wastewater as well. In Ann Arbor, what's generally done is our old landfill, the leachate from the landfill is diverted to the sanitary sewer. So it runs through the wastewater treatment plant and thence into the surface waters of the Huron River. But a main concern right now are biosolids and compost. And their contamination mostly comes because PFAS are already in the food chain, but also because you have substantial contamination from PFAS that's in fast food wrappers and other food packaging materials. The only way that we're going to stop this from happening is by reforming the Federal Toxic Substances Control Act to invoke what's called the precautionary principle, which has been used in Europe for some years. And what this means is that you're not allowed to manufacture and distribute large quantities of a new chemical until you have actually tested them for human health, and in many cases, ecological health as well. So the United States is the only advanced developed country that does not, that accepts a manufacturer's statement that substances recognized as generally safe before they're allowed to manufacture and release it. And moreover, that these are all proprietary compounds and proprietary mixtures that they're not required, that are are trade secrets. So they are not. It would take a lawsuit to find out what actually PFAS compounds are in a particular substance that's being sold on the market. There's quite a bit of PFAS in cosmetics as well, but it's mainly entering the food chain through through fast food wrappers and other food packaging. But meanwhile, all that stuff ends up in compost and biosolids as well. And these biosolids are oftentimes spread on agricultural fields. So where the plants will take up some of them to some degree, and others will be leached out of the biosolids in the agricultural fields onto surface waters. So just briefly, what are our local PFAS sources? In the Huron River, the major point source, as Brian Stieglitz already said, it's from the Wixom, the Tribar cleaning plant number 4 in Wixom. And there's 2 other plants up there that have released PFAS via Norton Creek. And that's what triggered the PFAS alerts in the Huron River. And some fish were tested in Kent Lake in the Kensington Metro Park. And that's what prompted the fish advisory, because they had very high levels of PFAS. And I should also say that these fish advisories will likely last for years because of the persistence of PFAS in the environment and in living tissues. So it's going to take, I've been told it will take at least 2 more years for the fish, for the PFAS at least, was measured in these fish, to come down to the level that the fish advisory could become lifted. There are several groundwater sites upstream of us that could eventually leak PFAS into the Huron River. One is the Brighton Thermophil site. Another is the Chrysler-Scio Introl site that's at Zeeb and Huron River Drive. The state is monitoring. They have groundwater wells where they're monitoring the plumes of PFAS that are coming from these sites. They will not likely provide a significant source of PFAS contamination in the future, even if they do leak. And then there's the landfill leachates. There's several landfills upstream of us that have contaminated groundwaters that are gradually migrating into the Huron River. So, but the thing that we all have to remember is that most exposure worldwide for PFAS and PFOA, which are the only PFAS compounds that have any real data in humans, is that most people worldwide that are exposed to PFAS and PFOA, 70% of it comes through food ingestion. And this has been going on for decades. It's mostly in aquatic fish and invertebrates, oysters, other seafood. Again, it's mostly tends to concentrate in liver and meat. So I've been telling people, or whatever you do, you might want to stop eating liver, especially fish livers. For those of you that are fond of sushi, and then dairy products. Generally, 25% of exposures come through drinking water, but this is something that can be more easily contained and more easily monitored and contained. About roughly 5% of exposures occur through fabric dust, where that's inhaled, dust from carpets and other fabrics that have been treated with PFAS. In terms of these newer PFAS compounds, it's hard to tell. As Brian was saying, they're monitoring a subset of all these PFAS compounds, but IGLA just did a study of plating plants, and they discovered that indeed the plating plants have replaced their PFAS-containing products that they use in these chrome plating plants. PFAS, they're no longer using them, and the monitoring data seems to indicate that. However, some of them have no PFAS, and the substitute products have no PFAS in them, but some of them have another PFAS called 6,2-FTS, which is not always monitored. But I believe that that's in the set of the compounds that Brian was testing for. So this is something we might expect to come out of these plating plants in the future, is 6,2 FTS. So just to highlight the problem is that there was a study some 8 years ago by now of wastewater sludge in Sweden, and you can test for total PFAS because there are 4,700 compounds, and that these individual compounds are it's very difficult to measure them at the part per trillion levels. There's a way of getting a measurement of how much PFAS is in a sample by using an assay called extractable organic fluorine assay, which will tell you or give you a rough mass balance of how much PFAS is in a particular sample without measuring the individual ones. And so a large proportion of these extractable organic fluorines measured in these wastewater sludges in Sweden were unidentified. And that means close to 87 to 98% in the wastewater and 87 to 91% in the sludge, which is turned into biosolids. So so whenever we look at these total amount of PFAS, that's a misnomer. Nobody is ever measuring in these mass spec assays, nobody is measuring the total amount of PFAS. What they're measuring is a subset that they think are likely to be there. But again, none of them, except or very few of them, have any regulatory backing to them, to any cleanup procedure. So the precursor compounds make a significant contribution. Precursor compounds are compounds that are degraded in nature and in the body to PFAS or PFOA. So when you tend to get smaller perfluorocarboxylic acids during a wastewater treatment process, and the amounts of unknown PFAS have definitely increased in Swedish wastewater from 2012 to 2015, when that study was published. So I think the next to the last slide here is many people are aware the city tested the PFAS content in its compost, in the finished compost at its compost facility. There's other data coming out from Linda Lee's laboratory. She's a professor at Purdue University, and she's published several papers where she's analyzed composts and packaged biosolids for PFAS compounds. And what this is telling us is that if you look at compost that just comes from leaves, grass, in the backyard, yard waste, in other words, you have very little contamination of the compost from PFAS compounds. However, if you look at compost that includes food waste and compostable food serviceware, which the tragedy here is that it's good to add these food wastes because they're high in nitrogen content, so the resulting biosolids are a much better fertilizer than just adding the leaves and grass and backyard compost, which tends to be low in nitrogen or high in carbon. However, what you can see here is that the composts at our facility that were sampled on October 25th in 2019 come in roughly in the middle of what's seen in other municipal composts. Down at bottom, you see and even higher levels of PFAS that are in commercially available biosolids that you can find bagged in stores such as Home Depot, Lowe's, and other stores. So you should be careful buying composts and biosolids that are bagged, that are offered for sale in these, gardening store outlets. You'll see that there's one outlier here. Now, these samples were all reported under condition of anonymity, because nobody would willingly give a sample to the professor for testing if it was going to be published, if what their levels of PFAS in their product were published. So these are all, it's unknown what these biosolids are, except for one, the really large outlier here. This is millorganite, which comes from the city of Milwaukee's municipal wastewater treatment plant. So milorganite is definitely higher than many other biosolids that are offered commercially on the market. So on, the last slide here is just that I provided for you are just key information sources if you want to know more about PFAS. But just to cap this, there is still no regulation of PFAS by the EPA. There is the state is regulating them for drinking water, but there are no standards or regulatory authority for PFAS in either biosolids or wastewater treatment plant effluent. So that's the next thing the state is working aggressively on. And I'll just want to say, finish by saying that the state MPART program has done a very good job. They have very dedicated staff there that have pursued this contamination as very properly with the budget that they have. And that Michigan is actually ahead of many other states in their regulation of PFAS. So that's all I have to say. So I'm going to stop my sharing and I'll answer any questions. Okay, Shannon?
If you could actually go back to sharing your screen.
Oh, yeah.
I know you just closed out.
I'm trying to figure this out.
And go back to the slide that shows the composting graph.
Yeah.
Could you just point out where, I'm a little confused about sort of where Ann Arbor is in this graph.
Oh, okay. Well, the total PFAS that they measured come up as this.
The entire thing is the Ann Arbor results, basically. Is that what you're saying?
If you sum up all the 26 compounds that were measured in the compost, the sum of the PFAS compounds come out at 31 parts per trillion.
And so the arrow is pointing, like, I guess I'm a little confused by so our facility is this top chunk and then the lower.
Oh, no, I have not plotted any of the Ann Arbor data here. Like, can you see my cursor? Can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
So, for example, for this municipal compost, this right here is the total of the PFAS.
And so this is like because at the bottom it says Ann Arbor compost facility sampled, and so this is not like a summary of what this graph is. Having it at the bottom. Okay, I was confused.
Sorry,
by that.
that's misleading. I'm sorry. This is where that total for Ann Arbor comes in.
I see. That's the gray line is where we fall within that. Okay.
Yeah. So up here, so you see, we're basically showing up in the middle of where at least these composts were measured.
Okay. And so you had made a distinction between fast food packaging, which you had said was, pretty intense in terms of some of these chemicals in it. But then you had also talked about compostable containers. And so what I'm wondering is, are they made of pretty similar things? Should we be thinking about what we allow to go into our compost in terms of food containers? That's my question. It's like, I don't think that anybody I don't think of going to McDonald's and think I can put their stuff in our compost bin, but I do look at things that I get from, a local store that has a compostable cup or something that has, zucchini in it or something like that says it's compostable. Should we be thinking twice about putting those kinds of compostable containers in our own compost facility? And I say this as somebody who, as a landscape architect, I spec that compost every day in the work that I do for soil building capacity. And so I would just be very curious about what our facility is, and should we be thinking about shifting or how we say who gets, what gets in and what doesn't get in.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I have been trying to follow up on that with some of the some of the, supermarkets here that offer, containers. And so I've been doing my own investigation about that. First of all, nobody's really testing for those except if you go to the Environmental Working Group as an NGO, the Environmental Working Group, and they've acquired quite a lot of funding through Hollywood celebrities. And so they have done a very good job, as well as the Ecology Center here in Ann Arbor. These are the leading, and I should say the Silent Spring Institute. And you have in that last slide, I have links to their websites. So there's a limited amount of data because of that was obtained by these NGOs. There is no government organization that's been, because there's no regulatory authority, nobody's spending tax dollars to measure these things.
Okay.
In products.
And then my other question is, like, do we have, I'm sorry, sounds like you wanted to continue.
So you can go to those websites and see how they've ranked different people, different stores through sampling, of things taken, of various packaging taken from various stores nationally. What I have noticed is that most of the high-end stores here in Ann Arbor, their takeout containers do not have PFAS in them. But some of them do have a plastic that does not break down. They're made out of paperboard, but they're always lined. If you see, the insides have like a very polished looking surface, and those can be, in one case, they are like one supermarket here offers their takeout containers have a polymer, which is a copolymer of ethylene and acrylic acid. And that's not readily broken down. So when those things are composted, those plastics are still there as polymers. Yeah. But they're a smaller amount, and it's hard to tell what's going to happen with them over time.
Yeah. And then my other question, and I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, is I was under the impression that our, a wastewater treatment facility produces biosolids for fertilizer and things like that. I don't know if you know that, and if you feel like, again, it's disconcerting to kind of hear that we're trying to do the right thing with some of these ways of handling compost and stuff like that. And do you feel like any of the information you have will allow us to self-reflect on some of our own procedures within the city and affect some of the ways that we get to our goals with these items? Because I know there's a lot of pros and cons to all these things. I'm just wondering if you have any information on how we handle our own. I feel like I had heard that there are biosolids that come out of that process, but I'm not sure if you're aware of that. I know that you're way more aware of all those issues than I am in terms of how waste is handled in the city in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think this deserves a bigger discussion in the commission. We don't have time for it all today, but what I can say is that, the biosolids have been spread on agricultural land for decades. The only thing they're required to test for are heavy metals, and some kinds of, and a handful of pesticides, I believe. But they're generally, they're only required to test for heavy metals. So I think it would be, I'm working with some NGOs to try to see if we can sample some things upstream of us, especially, and maybe do what the Environmental Working Group has done and what Silent Spring Institute has done, to try to do fund some testing by an NGO to try to see where, my intuition tells me, though, that Ann Arbor is not a particular problem. Okay. A bigger problem is going to be the wastewater treatment plants that have industrial pretreatment permits, which are definitely contaminating their biosolids with. Ann Arbor has not been flagged as being contaminated because we don't have a point source here. And within Ann Arbor, there's no point sources that have been identified.
We may have some upstream potentially coming down to the Huron River, which then we're drinking and, goes into our food growing and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So, okay. All right. Thank you for that.
Okay. Let's see. I can't see everybody here.
You can leave the presentation if you want. I just wanted to understand that graph better. Thanks.
This is Chris Graham. What is the particular PFBS fertilizer that's so completely out of line with everything else?
Oh, well, you see the orange color here is PFAS mostly, and this blue color is PFHXA. See?
Mm-hmm.
So that is milorganite.
Oh, really?
Milorganite that comes from the city of Milwaukee's wastewater treatment plant.
Which I do really like to use.
And there's a lot of, it's particularly high in PFAS, but again, I can't say what these other ones were.
And where the PFAS is coming into their wastewater treatment plant through their wastewater stream somehow.
Well, yeah, because they have industries that are, you know, they're dumping their wastewaters into the municipal wastewater treatment plant.
Rough.
So, you know, that's being tracked here in Michigan. You know, I'm working with the Sierra Club and other NGOs to try to figure out what we can do to help finance some of this, you know, testing that will actually tell us, because Eagle is not going to have the funds and it doesn't have the regulatory authority either. So, you know, it's just, that's the central problem here is, you know, like our wastewater treatment plant, if they have the funds and they have the courage to test their own drinking water, it will happen. But there is no regulatory authority, you know, to test your drinking water until like earlier this month. Where municipal drinking, where people aren't required to test their water for PFAS.
And of these ones that are very low in PFAS or PFHXA content, do you know what they are?
No, I do not. I'm still investigating that. As I mentioned earlier that that this study was only possible because the you know, the samples that were provided were done under condition of anonymity. That after, if any of this data was published, that they were not to be identified. So this paper does not identify the sources, but I've heard anecdotally that this large one is from milorganite, from several people.
Very interesting.
All
right.
I can't see anybody's hand or anything.
Hey, Steve, this is John Mursky. I really appreciate the presentation. I appreciate your public service and the work you're doing for the Sierra Club and your presentation today. So thanks a lot. I have one question in terms of our exposure as human beings to PFAS. It seems to me one conclusion that one can draw is that a vegetarian diet is better than one that's heavy in dairy and meat and aquatic life, it seems. If that's 70% of our exposure, and we know that there's also other benefits in terms of health and also in terms of impact on greenhouse gas emissions, is that a valid conclusion?
Oh, definitely. You know, the only there are several studies that have been published over the last 10 years about plant uptake from PFAS, you know, from biosolids that were spread on agricultural land. Larger PFAS compounds like PFAS and PFOA, they generally bind to the soil pretty tightly. And the plants do not take those up, but they preferentially, they will take up some of these smaller chain compounds like PFBS, PFBA, PFHXA. These smaller PFAS compounds will be taken up by plants. Some of them, they do not concentrate them particularly. One of the reasons why the industry switched to the smaller compounds is because they do not bioaccumulate as much as the longer chain ones, but they are still as persistent. So you know, what I've been telling people is, yeah, plant-based diet is better. You should be more careful about eating fish, which is unfortunate. Freshwater fish, but mostly seafood. You can measure, there's quite a lot of PFAS in the blood of Inuit, the Inuit, and other populations that eat a lot of seafood, the Japanese. So, so you need to minimize your intake of these foods and try to eat as much of a plant-based diet as you can. And one thing I should say that I neglected to mention is that just this week, Jeff Irwin introduced a bill in the state legislature. It's called Senate Bill 1072, which is a bill to ban PFAS in all food packaging in Michigan. And Yusuf Ravi is submitting a similar bill in the House this week. So there are a handful of states, I think it's somewhere around 6 or 10, that have already done this. They've already banned the use of PFAS in food packaging. Washington, the state of Washington was the first. I think their ban doesn't come into effect until next year, because they've needed to delay to allow people to adapt to that regulation and change their supply chain.
Hey, Steve, I have one other conclusion I'd like to offer and get your reaction to it. You talked about the difference between U.S. regulation under TSCA, that's the acronym for the Toxic
Substance Control
Act, compared to the equivalent program of called REACH in Europe. And my conclusion or proposed conclusion is, we hear all the time how all these regulations are onerous, but none of them, well, when people make that conclusion, they're not thinking about the externalities and, in a sense, the tragedy of the commons, where these things can just be dumped in water or dumped in compost or wherever the case may be. And if you look at REACH in Europe, it's not like REACH in all of their regulations have sent their economies into total disasters, where they're just absolutely not able to compete on the world stage anymore because they have regulatory systems like REACH. Is that reasonable?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know. If I understand you right, you're asking if this will cripple American industry, manufacturing.
Yeah.
Impose these rules.
Well, yeah, yeah. My brother-in-law worked in the chemical industry for years and worked overseas in Switzerland for what's now part of BASF. And one of the areas that he worked in was related to REACH regulations. And my understanding is that that's been in place for a decade or more, if not longer. And their economy seems to be able to operate at a high level, and they're able to do so while protecting their residents from contaminations like these that are bioaccumulative and that are very, very long lasting. And it just seems to me that, when we hear all the time that regulations will kill the U.S. economy, I just don't understand it when I see economies like Europe that are highly competitive and they're able to control substances like these.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I can't speak to that with any authority, but I can give many examples about why that is not generally true. It's people resist raising the bar for their industry, but all that does is allow the more irresponsible players in the market to compete. To compete and get a higher profit. So I don't understand why people won't impose a floor, just to be responsible and make sure that there's an even playing field. But there was a problem disposing of Gen X the PFAS compound Genex in Holland. Now, the Netherlands had a problem. They couldn't dispose of it, so they sent it to North Carolina. And North Carolina was supposed to send it to a landfill in New Mexico. And so some environmental groups found out about that and tried to halt that whole process, but it's not clear what happened ultimately. Yeah,
So, Steve, I have a question.
Yeah, Rita.
This is Rita. Since we currently encourage people to put food waste and other compostables in our compost, we're now accepting things that here in Ann Arbor that are not really so great, it seems like. Do we have a plan for how to move forward with that? Or we're going to kind of hope that the legislation passes and do our best to support it? Or what do you see as like next steps to deal with our part of that food waste and compostable food serviceware?
Well, supporting that bill to have PFAS banned in food packaging. You know, you'll never get the PFAS out of the food waste. We're eating it and we're throwing it away.
So there's food waste, but you said that it didn't accumulate as much at least in vegetable type food, if I heard that correctly. And then there's the packaging, which I assumed was really the greater source.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if maybe we should say temporarily, hey, everybody, don't put your packaging in the compost.
Yeah, we can say that. There's no, we can educate, we can communicate that to people in the community. It looks like at least the high-end supermarkets around here have already done so. You know, they've already pretty much reduced the PFAS in their food packaging. But it's the fast food operations that are the main problem. So I think what we can do is we can take the data that's been generated by Environmental Working Group and other NGOs and try to publicize that. But I'm not sure how to publicize that.
Yeah, it just feels sort of ironic that we've all, that we've moved to this greater composting, and in a way we've got a problem that we'd rather not have.
Yeah. Yep, it's going to keep going on until we can get some kind of federal reform. So any other questions? We should move on shortly. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so I can see everybody. And so the next item on the agenda is public commentary. So I'm going to read my, I'm going to make a statement here. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 1-888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID number 924-5796-9823. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. And be patient, there is a delay of up to 30 seconds before a connection is established. So Galen will get any request for public comment.
Steve, I'm gonna wait 30 seconds and then I'll let you guys know. But I don't see anybody right now.
Okay. If there's nobody in the queue.
Nope, no one's in the queue.
Okay. Well, let's wait another 10 seconds then.
Okay.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the July meeting. Has everybody had a chance to look at the copy? Are there any suggested changes or revisions of the minutes from the July meeting? I don't see any hands raised. So do I have a motion to accept the minutes? Do I have a second? Okay, John Callowert, first and seconded by John Mursky. All who approve of the minutes, raise your hands. Anybody who does not approve, raise your hands. Okay, it passes unanimously. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda is vice chair. As you all know, Susan Hutton was our vice chair last year, and she left the board in May. She cycled off the board in May during our hiatus from the COVID-19 pandemic. So we should have a vice chair. So I've heard, I sent out an email earlier, so the floor is open to nominations. Raise your hand if you want to nominate someone. John Mursky.
I'd like to nominate Rita Mitchell. Rita indicated her interest in serving, and I think she'd do a great job. I've been working with her on the Natural Features Committee, and she's done an outstanding job.
Okay, are there any other nominations? Okay, do I have a second? I think I need a second. That's Chris Graham, seconds that nomination. So let's vote on electing Rita Mitchell as vice chair of the Environmental Commission. All who approve, raise your hands. Okay, all who are opposed, raise your hands. Okay, it's passed unanimously. Congratulations, Rita.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, John and Chris.
Bravo. Bravo, bravo.
Yes. I'll share some of the information I have that you might need should you have to take over this role.
Thank you.
All right. So moving on, regular business. Did everybody have a chance to review the proposed bylaw changes? I'm not sure where they came from and who made them. I was hoping to get an answer from city staff about that. Galen? Hello?
I'm gonna have to check with Chris Frost on that.
Oh, okay. But to me, they all looked proper and good, and they were clarifying, I thought. And so I don't. Did anybody have any other comment or objections to the bylaw changes? Rita?
I had just noticed as I was reading through them that there was one that looked to me like there was a word missing, and it wasn't in the edited section. And I'm sorry, I can't even find my own copy right now, but it was section 3.27, and it looked like it needed a word like clean energy or produce. It said produce clean, and it didn't say clean what.
Okay. Right.
And so it just looks like it needs a check.
Okay,
it's not a big deal.
Yeah, would you just communicate that to Galen?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a procedural question. Well, first I should acknowledge that I did not read the bylaws, so shame on me. But I do have a question in terms of how we handle this. Is there supposed to be a first and a second reading of this? Typically, like with resolutions and things like that, there's a first reading in one meeting, and then there's a second reading where we then finally vote. Is that what we need to do in the case of these bylaws? Does anybody know?
I think you're correct, but I was hoping I didn't have to read the bylaws out loud.
No, I don't think you have to read them. I just present them in the meeting, and then we can then finally approve them in the next meeting. And I think it would be helpful with, maybe this is already in the document. Rita, if you've read it, is there a side-by-side comparison that shows what was crossed out and what was added?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's not side by side, it's integrated.
Integrated, okay. Yep. Yeah. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, it's really clear, and these changes are not substantive at all. It's really just cleaning up language, and personally, I don't see any reason to wait to vote on them. If others aren't comfortable moving forward, I'm happy to defer, but I I feel ready to make a motion to approve them as submitted.
Okay. Right. John Calloway.
Weren't there some questions though about the commission composition and not being reflective of what we're currently at? I don't know, Steve, didn't you raise that in terms of the youth membership?
Yeah, it needs to have, there's no mention of youth members in there. So that's a deficiency right there. So does everybody feel like we need to have more explicit, definition of the responsibilities and the roles of a youth commissioner?
I don't know why we would approve bylaws that don't mention youth commissioners when we have a youth commissioner that's participating in this meeting.
I know. So I've already, I was going to wait until everybody else had said something before I brought that up. But I think there will definitely be. It was worth having a discussion here, and so this counts as the first reading. And so let's have I'll communicate this to the or Rita, and I can communicate this to Galen, and let's get something a copy that has these commissioners in it as well. And then we'll read that at the next meeting in September.
Okay.
These were being handled by Chris Frost, I think, right, in the attorney's office?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would, if you all have any comments, send them to me and including you, Rita, just send them to me and I'll compile them and I'll send them to Galen and he can decide who to send it to. Probably Chris Frost. Okay.
Steve, it's Chris Graham here. I saw you do some discussion about standing versus working groups.
Mm-hmm.
And when the Natural Features Committee came to the Environmental Commission, it was, prior to that, a council committee called the Natural Features Ordinance Committee.
Oh.
And it came originally as a standing committee.
Oh.
So we did have one. I don't think it matters one iota and not having to do the public process. It maybe is easier if we aren't, but we did have at least one standing committee. I think there was another on toxics back 10 years ago or 10 years ago anyway. So morphing to our committees being predominantly or completely working maybe makes sense, but it is a change from past history.
Okay. Yeah, this is the first I've heard of this. So let's thanks for bringing that up, Chris. So why don't we table that to a future meeting then? But you should just continue doing what you've been doing.
And we've been doing public sessions anyway.
Yeah, I know.
We have announced, they're announced, and I'm not sure we have outside participation very much in the Zoom era, but.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm sorry, I wasn't aware of that. Okay. So the Natural Features Ordinance is a standing committee as defined by our bylaws, by our current and future bylaws.
Well, I think you've changed it. The whole process now is Natural Features Working Group, and that's fine. I don't raise this as a request to change it.
Oh, okay.
I'm simply saying that you did have two standing committees, I think, and probably not having them works more smoothly.
Okay.
So without an Ann Arbor News, I'm not sure. Stuff happens when we don't know about it. I'm not happy about that circumstance.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is I think this is worth keeping in the back of all of our minds. I mean, I think, we want to be as open and transparent to the public as we can be.
Well, that's why if I'm raising a question at all, it's the difference between the two committees. Standing committees have to be public meetings. Working groups don't have to be.
Yeah, but the working groups do not make any decisions. There's no voting in a working group. It's just designed for compiling information and digesting it and putting it into a presentable form for the full commission.
I don't remember standing committees ever making independent decisions.
Yeah.
Everything came to the commission.
Okay.
Just briefly from the Energy Commission, and I can shorten my report later, but we have 6 working groups, no standing committees. In the past, sometimes Josh put them on Legistar, so they were announced in the public domain so people could participate. We had residents serving on the committees, and all of the work that we've done heretofore at least has gone through other commissions, for example, like Planning Commission, and then through City Council. So there's been ample opportunity for public comment and for public input. And in at least one case, in the EV charging group, we reached out and had meetings with DTE. We had meetings with developers. So I think Chris's point is correct that working groups are a lot easier to work with, and we still can ensure that we're engaging with the public and ensuring that we're inserting public comment into the overall process.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Any other comments about the structure of the working groups and the rules for committees? Okay. So let's move on to the capstone projects for the SEES students. Just a quick update, because my recollection is that we're supposed to just give a 10,000-foot summary to Peck by September 1st, and then he'll do some circulating around the SEES department and see what needs to be fleshed out.
I already did send around, I think everybody, right? Contact information on who to get in touch with. Nate Giesler.
Yeah.
I think everyone got that, right?
Yep. You did.
So I think I did my job really a lot earlier than I thought, just simply because Nate was eager to get going. But he's the man.
You're talking about the master's projects?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did get it, and the Natural Features Committee has one assembled and ready to come to you.
Okay, but it goes to Nate, not me.
Right.
Got it.
Yep.
Yeah. This is the perfect time to do it, and if it might have to be done remotely, whatever ones we have this year. We'll see how it goes. So keep that in mind too. Right now, with the governor's guidelines, our students can get out and do field work. They can also do human subjects work. So there's quite a bit we can do. Our research enterprise is going pretty well for grad students. So, but I can't guarantee anything. And it all depends on this virus thing I've heard about.
Yeah, for real.
And we're about to really have quite the experiment going on now.
Yep, indeed.
Okay, so it sounds like we're on progress with the capstone project proposals. And so Chris, thanks for sharing the one that you drafted, and you'll send it to Nate Geisler. And if there are any others, they'll send them to Nat Geisler within the working groups after some review with the working groups. Okay?
So the one we have goes through the Natural Features Committee tomorrow. And if it comes through there intact, then we'll forward it on.
Okay, great. Any other comments on capstone projects at this time? Okay, Bob, Needham.
Sorry. Yeah, just real quick, just a heads up that there is another potential one in the works. I did write to Nate Giesler and ask about just a exploratory email of whether the subject of microplastics in the Huron might be well suited to a project. And he said that Dr. Stoltz had mentioned that possibility, and he thought the Huron River Watershed Council may have as well. So some combination of entities may come up with one on that topic too.
Okay.
it might be worth reaching out to Susan Hutton. I recall her mentioning in the previous meeting that there had been some measurements of microplastics in the Huron River, and that the levels were,
Right.
as I understood them, on the high side.
That's
right?
where this is coming from. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So let's see. So Chris, you want to, the next item on the agenda is the natural features tree protection ordinance.
Chris, you're muted.
Turn on a microphone. Rita's been leading the effort, get us through the drafting, and I'll let her comment for you.
Okay.
All right, so this will be really quick. We are working to review the UDC for protections that apply to site plans that would protect heritage trees, landmark trees, and any trees that we determine are registered trees for various reasons. We are literally crawling through phrase by phrase of the documentation and making the changes that our group feels are appropriate. So we are, I would say, a little more than halfway through what we need to go through. And we've been having some great success, I think, with the group, but it has taken some dedication to having basically a weekly meeting so that we can do what we need to do. John and Chris spent a lot of time reviewing the document prior to this and got us set up with some original kinds of edits. And now we're just going through and with everyone who's wanted to be actively involved to put it together. So I don't have an estimate yet of when we'll have a final product. I think we're going to have a little bump with the Labor Day weekend coming up, but I expect to move ahead and another month, maybe coming close. That's what I would like. So.
Sorry, Commissioner Mitchell, what group was that again?
That's the Natural Features Working Group. It's the one that you've been helping us, Galen, with setting up those weekly meetings. And we're working on the Heritage Tree Ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Shannon?
Rita, in the last, I struggled to kind of find the last draft, and I found something from Chris, but it doesn't have the list of trees that's in that. And I'm just wondering if there's any way that you could send that around as well, so that we can compare those things against each other. Because I'd like to be able to take a closer look, but obviously that's a big piece of it, is sort of understanding what your
right.
What your thresholds are for things.
Yeah. So right now, it is really literally a drafty document that's full of notes and markings of where we've ended and things like that. So just to be sure I get you what you want, do you want the draft document as well as the list of trees?
I think it would be helpful, just even if it's full of, replacement stuff and things like that.
Yeah, that's what it is.
That's totally fine. I completely understand. It's a messy process to go through this. I'm not expecting anything finished, but I'd love to just take another look. I know Chris sent one out a while ago that I looked at, but I'm just curious to see where you all are with things. And then again, the list is the big thing,
right?
To understand, because obviously that's the thresholds that you guys are regulating too.
Right.
So if you could send both, that would be awesome.
I will do that. So, but just to let you know, we have really not addressed the list yet. It's been prepared, but we haven't addressed it as a group at all.
Yep. But just even if I just know where you all are headed or whatever, then that would be helpful.
So to be clear, Shannon, we have not especially answered your question about whether we deal with just native trees or we deal with all big trees.
Okay. Well, even just that, just knowing where you guys are with it, I want to just give a more kind of more thoughtful response that goes through it a little bit more carefully. And so just having the whole thing there in the state that it is, knowing that it's just, midpoint, I totally get it. I just still would like to be able to look at it a little bit more carefully. So again, I totally understand that it's still evolving and things like that. But I would just like to be able to know where you all are at this moment in time.
So a key piece of where we are is that there's a second set of amendments to the UDC that would protect all trees, all landmark, heritage, and registered trees in the city, not just those in a site plan process. That is to say, to disturb a tree, a heritage, landmark, or registered tree, you would have to go to City Hall and get a permit. And just how to trigger that process, our original idea was to work through the grading permit and tighten that, because the key issue about losing big trees is compaction of soils under them, which happens all the time around house expansion projects, for example, or parking area expansions. And to that end, if we only address native trees in that, there are a whole lot of planted trees, native or otherwise, that people would miss on their neighbor's property if they were cut down or killed by a construction activity that goes on unpermitted. So
are you saying that you can't remove a tree on your own property if it's a certain size? If it's just because up to this point, obviously anybody can, it can be a huge tree or it can be a small tree. You don't have to permit with anybody in order to remove a tree on your property. And so you all are saying if it's a landmark tree or a heritage tree that you would have to go get a permit to be able to take that down and then do mitigation.
We haven't gotten to the second ordinance that grew out of the Packard Road deal. The first ordinance is to amend the provisions that govern site plans.
Right.
When they're required. But we're losing a lot of trees across the city, and wonderful big old trees, whether native or not, on single family house expansion projects, ignorance among contractors who say, oh God, no, we're not going to hurt that tree. But of course, then they drive all over the roots and the tree gets hurt. There's a great deal of education. So there are two parts of what we're trying to do to protect the bigger trees in the city. The first part is site planning process, and that's easier. But we're trying to load the weapons in definitions and so on, and in amending our tree list that existed for 30 years in order to get to the second step.
Which is a separate ordinance for individuals on single family lots that aren't going through the city permit process in any other way that they would be.
That's a second step, and it takes a lot of pre-preparation with contractors and excavators and tree guys, and to know they have to be able to distinguish what a landmark, heritage, and registered tree is, and then they have to know they need to go get a permit when they enter somebody's property.
And I'd like to just say that for me, it's sort of like triggering that culture of appreciation of trees that we'd like to see across all properties, regardless. So that's kind of the direction I'd like to go. And I think that our first one can start the conversation. And I was talking with Councilwoman Bannister today about potentially even going in an educational route in the direction of educating the community about the value of our big trees, and to do kind of like the way we've approached the pesticides and the turf grass. Like let's learn about what the values are, and let's start getting education now to turn the tide so that maybe we won't have to use such a big stick or anything to get people to keep their trees.
It'll work, I think, more or less like retention requirements work, and that permit works.
In terms of the individual, the residential stormwater permit, is that what you're referring to?
Exactly. And instead of being triggered by a 200 square foot or larger addition to impervious surface, it would be triggered by any vehicles or work being done that requires them going off impervious surfaces. In other words, a grading permit of that.
Soil erosion control permit, basically.
Well, it aims at preventing compaction of soils.
Right, but that gets triggered by the erosion control permit.
By any permit, by any action that is likely to cause compaction of soils. Then you have to bring a drawing, a sketch in that says, here are the trees on the property, and here's where the drainage system is going to go, and here's where we're going to dig trenches, and here's where we're going to drive around behind a house, and how we're going to do it, and how we're going to protect trees. But
I'll be curious to see. I think you're going to experience pushback.
Oh gosh, we got it the last time we tried 30 years ago.
Yeah,
and
I think that, yeah.
The whole game plan is to design the ordinance, but then go out and work with the excavators and the tree guys and the landscape contractors and get them really on board about.
But I think that residents too
process.
Would be, there's going to be pushback with this too.
Well,
So,
there's a permit.
No, I get it. But
It's
if
not
I
a prohibition.
No, I get it. But if I have a big oak tree overhanging my house and I cut it down because it's over my roof and it's a 30-incher, then I'm going to have to plant 20 trees on my property.
Don't know how the mitigation will work, but
do you see what I'm saying though? It's like that's
something.
You may, I'm predicting some serious pushback on this, I guess is what I would say, just as somebody who's in the industry.
I think your prediction is correct, but we'll see how the political tide pushes.
I think it would be great to have the conversation though, and also to promote the culture of trees. So, and I think you have the background to help us support that as well.
Yeah, no, I get it. I only have so much bandwidth. So.
Next year, we'll get into this.
Okay, thanks for the update.
Okay. Well, yeah, many times it usually requires a controversy to get a substantial public discussion about anything, doesn't it? So, okay, did you want to, do you think that, when do you think you might be ready to bring this to the commission for a vote? Maybe early next year, or?
The amendments to the site plan portions of the UDC for this purpose sometime this fall.
Oh, okay. So what about October?
I don't know. I'll say maybe on that one. That's my guess.
That would be the first.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking about December 3rd, I think it is, probably. Okay.
Yeah, instead of Thanksgiving.
Okay.
Maybe a draft by then. Maybe I think it's worth sending it up to the whole commission and let comment happen before we say, oh, okay, we're ready to send this on to planning commission.
Yeah, let's put that. Okay. So let's put it on the December 3rd agenda.
All right.
Okay. Let's see. Any other discussion about the natural features tree ordinance? Okay, I don't see anything.
So bear in mind, as I've always said to people who say, yes, we have a natural features ordinance. No, we have a whole set of amendments to the various development ordinances, and all of which now are packed into what's called the universal development ordinance. So we're amending pages in this 240-page thing, which is an ongoing process that Shannon knows very well about. Every single planning commission meeting, there's a set of amendments.
Okay.
Nothing stands alone anymore.
Right. So, so we'll move on to the reports from the committees, other commissions, council and chair. First is administrator and council. The administrator is not here. How about the council? Commissioner Bannister?
Yes. Councilmember Kathy Griswold was gonna join us, and but I will paraphrase what she was gonna say. She is working on amending the UDC Chapter 40 about height of vegetation. and obstructing the sight distance for pedestrians and bicyclists and cars. And so that it has been sent back to the Transportation Commission for more review. But she and I wanted to check with some of you all to see if anyone has a special interest or expertise in helping us set the optimal height level for vegetation in the right of way at the side of the road, because for the optimal level for sustainability. So like right now it's 12 inches and it's the resolution on the table is going to 18 inches for grasses. And so far the chapter 40 UDC is mainly on grasses. So we would like to expand it to other vegetation at the side of the road. And so we're looking for input on what the other vegetation would be. And we're looking for input on what the optimal height level, like maybe 36 inches is fine as long as it's away from the sight distance of drivers. So I'm paraphrasing, this is really Kathy Griswold's main area, but we were hoping that maybe Chris Graham or others of you that know about the height of vegetation blocking visibility, we're trying to set the optimal levels for both sustainability and visibility for public safety.
No, I understand you. So Mike Apple, you had your hand up. Mike?
Yeah, I'd say that there wouldn't necessarily need to be a limit unless it were causing a visual obstruction. And that's always been, I think, a common sense approach that's never been codified in terms of law. And it would be nice to have that actually written down. There are plenty of places where there might be a hill on the shoulder or cars that are parked where the vegetation is already, or the sight lines are already blocked regardless of what vegetation is on the curb. So I'd say that anything that looks at short limits opens up the potential for you click fix battles between neighbors that may or may not appreciate somebody else's choice of landscaping. So anything that can be done that can open up height limits or reduce height limits and take a more common sense approach where visual sight lines are actually the problem as opposed to a measure of height of vegetation off the ground, I would strongly recommend. Just because when these little battles start between neighbors about vegetation, that's a lot of city staff time that ends up getting involved in potential for enforcement about tit for tat type things. So if a height limit can be reduced altogether, then I would recommend that.
Thank you.
I have a question for Mike and maybe Shannon, and that is, should this be directed, the proposed changes at the UDC, or should it be directed at the Orange Book, which governs the public right of way? The UDC is basically private property, which is already set back from the road or crossings or whatever the case may be. And it's really obstructions that are in the public right of way that are probably of the greatest concern. I mean, both might be, but it seems that there needs to be at least an equal focus on the so-called Orange Book, as well as the UDC. And since the UDC covers private property that's set farther back, maybe any restrictions there would be less restrictive along the lines that Mike talked about than ones that are in the public right of way. Could either of you comment on that?
Shannon?
So it all comes down to sight distance from cars pulling out of driveways. And there's calculations out there, but very few people are ever going to do that. It's all based on the speed of the road and the distance from, you know, the back of the curb line. And I would just say that it is a concern. This spring we went out and did some measurements for a project that we were doing along Carpenter Road, a bunch of bioswales in the right of way. And we followed the guidelines, but it's like, wow, when we went out and measured exactly and really looked at it, we were blocking views. And this is on Carpenter Road in front of Home Depot. I mean, it's like, you don't want to mess around with blocking people's, safety. That's a big deal. And so we ended up lowering things. I think there are very few places in Ann Arbor. It's like there's so many driveways that are really close together that like sight distance is just always an issue. And again, it's this whole formula and this big triangulation thing. And I doubt that anyone's going to do that. And so, Mike, I kind of respectfully disagree. I think it'd be a lot easier to just say it's a height. And then it's just way more clear for people because different cars have different heights. And it all has to do with like where you are in your seat, how tall you are, and looking out of the car. And it's just, that's pretty difficult to determine. And I get it that it's like, it really should be around that. I just think it's really difficult to be able to govern with that as something that feels pretty relative based on individual cases. We've always used 18 inches, maybe 2 feet you could get away with as kind of general guidelines when people are putting like rain gardens in the right of way or things like that. But it needs to be measured from the top of curb up. So sometimes with rain gardens, they're lower and so people can get away with, that. But I think being clear about where the measuring point starts is really important. And that there should be some sort of overall statement about what Mike is getting at, that like, I would advocate for a certain height, but that any sort of obstruction in terms of safety is really, that's an issue. So it is, I think it does belong in the Orange Book, though. The Orange Book is a little weird because not every citizen has the Orange Book. Yet many of us mow in that area and manage that area as if it's our own yards. And so it's a gray area, I think, in terms of that. So I think it does belong in there, but it probably belongs in some other much more easily findable, place for people to be able to refer to different codes. And I get where Mike is coming from because people have used this kind of thing to be able to say, I basically don't want native plants in my neighbor's yard. And I don't agree with that. We do those designs a lot but we do need to be super careful about safety as it gets close. And so I think like what John was saying, back behind the sidewalk, there's a lot more freedom that you can have. But that once you're reaching that sidewalk point and you're in the right of way, that there probably should be some, very clear safety regulations around that. You could probably go up to, I think 18 inches is sort of a broad thing out there, but I think it'd be worth sort of measuring, frankly, to see if you could get away with 24, because maybe you could, or maybe you can get away with 30, so, but part of it depends on is the road going up or down and, things like that too. So you want to stay pretty safe because if you're on a hill and something's going up, then, that could affect things as well. So I guess that's my take on it personally.
And the only other thing I'd add here is that it was probably in 2004 or 5 that the city changed some ordinance to be able to allow tall vegetation in the right of way in the first place. And that's going back. And I have no idea whether that was based on the UDC code or whether that was based on the Orange Book code. But I do remember that it was back when Jean Carlberg was still on city council because she participated in the committee that was doing it. And they decided on a height that was appropriate for right-of-way vegetation. And I think it was 30 inches or 32 inches. And it also had some sort of strange wording in it, like 32 inches over the course of the year or something like that, which gave some people some flexibility for being able to cut things down seasonally, which was also nice if you have a grass landscape that sometimes gets a little taller than that.
Okay. Chris?
Difficult. This is really difficult. I've had multiple clients get in trouble with their neighbors about wildflowers and not 3 feet tall. They just don't like them, and they use any pretense they can to try to get it mowed. And it's not very cool result.
Well, I mean, in my neighborhood, the main thing is that the city's planted large trees, heritage trees and landmark trees are on the right of way.
So there's probably a minimum branch height somewhere in the code as well.
Yeah, but it's the tree trunk that really blocks your view coming into an intersection. So how does the city handle that?
They don't, but it doesn't take up the entire thing. And so if you think about a car, behind something like that, it'd have to be a pretty skinny car to be able to block the whole thing.
Oh, I see.
For a row of dense trees all the way along, that's different than one trunk.
Yeah.
I think is the way that it is seen. And then the code says that for a tree in the right of way, you need branching above 8 feet. That's the way the code is.
Okay. So in other words, you could have like a tall you could have a patch of pampas grass that's like 10 feet tall as long as it's not more than like 3 feet wide.
Well, no, I think that's what is, Councilmember Bannister is getting at. And in fact, I can think of a spot in Water Hill where somebody does have that and it's actually kind of unsafe. So it's at the right point in a curve and it's like you can't see who's coming around it, So I think 8 foot tall things that are really wide do get in the way, so.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Great, thank you very much. And this will be recorded, so I'm sure Kathy and I will review it again tomorrow. So
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Ann. It looks like Chip isn't with us anymore. So what about so staff? It's time for the staff report.
Yes. Okay. Hang on one second. Let's say this. Okay, on this Tuesday, we hosted our first, hang on, I want to get the right verbiage. We hosted our first virtual neighborhood associations and community leaders sustainability meeting. We had about 16 folks in attendance. It was a good meeting. We covered A20, we covered Solarize, also we talked about grants, for neighborhood associations and also the EV bulk buy. So EV bike bulk buy. So it was a pretty good meeting and hopefully we can do it quarterly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that's it.
That's it? Okay. Thanks, Galen. So the next item is representatives of other commissions, Park Advisory. Mike?
Let's see. In Parks news, the Cascades are being closed to tubing starting tomorrow to increase social distancing and keep people from spending a lot of time close together down there. In other parks news, the stream rehabilitation project in Huron Hills is going to get started this fall. So what was once a ditch that ran through both sections of the Huron Hills Golf Course will be turned into a meandering stream with wetlands, a lot of habitat improvement and flood control improvement. And that's the good and exciting news.
Where is that?
They've had a lot of challenges with COVID and pools and things like that, but hasn't everybody?
Where's the stream in Huron Hills?
It's on both sides. It's on the hilly 8 and it's on the flat 10 as well. And then it also runs through the neighborhood to the east side of Huron Parkway as well.
Mm-hmm. Shannon?
Just a little clarification on that one. That's because that's a project that we're working on in our office. And there's base flow on the side that is flowing between Huron Parkway, or is it? No, Huron River Drive and the river, but there is not base flow between neighborhood and the hilly section up above. It's basically, you know, when it rains. And so that will be more a series of kind of wetland rain gardens in that section that will be more actively flowing when it's taking stormwater from the neighborhood. So it won't be constantly flowing all the time, all the way through, just at that bottom flatter section. And then it will be flowing in the hillier part during storm events, basically.
Okay.
Are there storm drains that are charging the upper part as from
Yes.
overage and?
Correct. Yep. So we'll be taking the storm drains that are coming through there. And then it also is a natural valley that probably had sort of intermittent streams, my guess are, you know, I mean, during, you know, back when it was all intact. I don't know that we know that for sure, but it's not, it's much more constant flow coming in the lower part than it is in the upper part. It'll dry out in the upper part.
Lower part's groundwater?
Yes. And wetland from across the road and that little neighborhood over there.
Okay, and energy commission.
So a couple of updates. First of all, we welcomed our 2 new youth commissioners, and we also have a new normal commissioner. So we have 3 new commissioners on the Energy Commission. Secondly, both the lighting ordinance and the EV charging ordinance that the Energy Commission and its working groups have been working on, both received unanimous votes of support from the Planning Commission and are now moving on to City Council. Thank you for all the work the Planning Commission did on that. I mean, they were really, really thorough in their questioning and review. And I think hopefully they have a good chance of passing City Council. Our last meeting was a working session. And as I mentioned, we have 6 working groups. But to be frank, not all of them have been all that active recently. We want to start those back up and also recruit members of the local community to serve on those, as both of those other 2 working groups that worked on lighting ordinance and the charging both had substantial residential support. And what we're doing right now with the working session is we've had an action item tracker, and we've expanded that action item tracker and aligned it with the A20 plan. So now we have all different kinds of light items of potential projects, what element of the A20 plan they correspond to, I should say strategy and actions. And then we're asking commissioners to indicate whether or not they're interested in serving on those project teams, whether they're willing to lead the project team and to suggest people in the community that could serve on them. We also have from the A20 prioritization matrix an indication of what priority level those projects are in terms of aligning with the A20 priorities. And we're going to be reviewing all of that in our next meeting and deciding which of those then we really focus on. There's a lot more possibilities than what we want to take on, and depending on interests and the number of people willing to work on those, we'll boil those down to, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 projects or something like that. And then the last thing, I was elected chair in the last meeting, so I'm now chair of the Energy Commission, but will continue to serve as liaison to the Environmental Commission. That's it.
Okay, thanks, John. Planning Commission?
Yeah. So thanks for mentioning, John, the lighting and the EV ordinance. And I would just like to give a shout out to Sally Owe for first coming before the Environmental Commission probably over 2 years ago. And this is a citizen that just had a bee in her bonnet about this and really cared about it and just poured tons of hours into it. And I really admire what she did. And I just would also like to encourage anybody who's watching in our vast television audience right now that you too, if you care about something and, you know, it's going, I mean, I'm hopeful that it'll get through city council. And I just, I think it's amazing that she did that. And that, you know, one person has the power to change something in a really powerful way like that. So I just would like to acknowledge her. The next piece is that we passed the Viridian project, which is over on Platte Road, next to County Farm Park, which is very environmentally, I shouldn't say the Planning Commission passed it. I had to recuse myself because I've been working on the project. So the Planning Commission passed it. And it's a highly sustainable project that is all net zero, all electric buildings, many innovations in really interesting, challenging ways. I think they've challenged a lot of city codes too, which has been, I think, a healthy process to go through, you know, for the city as well. And it's going to be exciting to see it kind of move through the system and see how things end up with city council. So it's encouraging to see developers wanting to be able to take on these kinds of challenges and be able to muscle through the system that way. So we'll see where that goes, but it was exciting to be able to see that move through the next step.
Good. Okay. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Sharon. So the working groups. Let's say the solid waste working group didn't meet last week. We will meet next week, and I'll send out some emails before then. See the natural features working group. We've already heard from them. We've been working on the ordinance. Is there anything else, Chris?
No, Steve, okay. It's those two things are taking up our time.
Okay, I'm sure. Yeah, and you've integrated the pollinators working group with the natural features working group.
Well, we're starting, and water committee also, maybe. The first discussion happened about integration, and we'll see how that all works.
Okay, and water, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, we did, as Chris says, start the integration discussions. Don't really have membership of the water working group now, so it's a good time to integrate from that perspective. Mm-hmm. I mean, we do have things happening for our next agenda, which is coming right up here on the agenda anyway. So, but next Environmental Commission meeting, we will hear from Jerry Hancock about the floodplain overlay district ordinance, as well as from the Huron River Watershed Council updating their watershed management plan.
Okay. All right, thanks. So the next scheduled meeting is September 24th. And we reach our second public commentary. So let's see, public comment. This is an opportunity, a second opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 1-888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID number 924-5796-9823. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Be patient, there is a delay of up to 30 seconds before connection is established.
There's no one for public commentary.
Okay. So the last item on the agenda is items for the next agenda. I think Bob has already mentioned 2 of them. Are there any other suggestions for agenda items? Ann Bannister?
Yes, I am hoping, it sounds a little unrealistic, but I am hoping to bring a tree ordinance in anticipation of the tree ordinance. And so it would just be something along the lines of kind of like Rita mentioned with the integrated pest management, where it's trying to tell people education and outreach and the culture of appreciation of the trees and the compaction of the soils around town, and trying to bring it, not that it's a bunch of tree huggers, but from the 20th century, but bring it into the 21st century, that these trees are multitaskers in our sustainability. And there was also, the New York Times article last weekend about how redlined neighborhoods have less trees and a lot bigger heat islands and a lot more unpleasant summers. And so it's as we know, it's an equity issue and all that stuff. So I'm pulling together all my loose ends, and one of my loose ends is a resolution for council in advance of finishing our work on the natural features working group. So pencil me in for September 24 on that, and I'll see what I can do.
Okay. How much time would you like for that?
Well, I don't know yet. Is the natural features group meeting tomorrow at noon?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm working. Yes. So at this point, it could be from 3 minutes to 20 minutes.
Okay, great. Okay, and duly noted. Any other suggestions? All right, well, I declare this meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your time.
Good job, Steve.
Hey, thanks, everybody. See you on September 24th.
Bye.
Bye-bye.